Dad Perfect Revents. The $175,000 gambling debt on Jennifer's laptop was shocking enough. Finding the emails about my wife's practice run made my blood freeze. I'm sitting here now, 6 months after everything went down, still trying to wrap my head around how blind I was. My name is Carl Peterson, 58 years old, and I spent 35 years building houses before I retired last spring. Thought I knew how to read people, especially the ones sitting at my dinner table every Sunday. Turns out I was dead wrong about the most dangerous one of all. It was November 15th, 2023, when Jennifer called me about her laptop acting up again. "Dad, can you swing by this morning? This thing keeps freezing on me, and I've got client presentations due." Jennifer works as an office manager for a medical practice, handles their scheduling system, payroll stuff. Computer problems meant she couldn't do her job. I drove over to the house on Maple Street, the same house Dorothy and I bought in 1998, raised our kids in, planned to grow old and together. After Dorothy passed in March of 2022, Jennifer and Tony moved in with little Nathan. Made sense at the time. Big house, good school district, and I was rattling around my apartment feeling sorry for myself most days. Tony answered the door in his work clothes, tool belt hanging loose around his waist. "Morning, Carl." Yen's upstairs getting Nathan ready for school. Coffee's fresh if you want some. Anthony Davis had been part of our family for 4 years now. Married Jennifer right after her divorce from Nathan's biological father was finalized. Tony was everything that first husband wasn't. Reliable, handy around the house, good with Nathan, treated Jennifer like she deserved to be treated. At least, that's what we all thought. I found the laptop on the kitchen table, opened it up, started running the usual diagnostics. Jennifer came downstairs with Nathan, kissed Tony goodbye, grabbed her purse and keys. "Dad, you're a lifesaver." Tony said he'd look at it, but you know how he is, with technology. She laughed, ruffled Nathan's hair. "Say bye to Grandpa, baby. We're gonna be late." Nathan gave me a quick hug, still sleepy, backpack sliding off his shoulder. 7 years old, looked more like Jennifer every day. Smart kid, asked good questions, loved building Lego sets with me on weekends. After they left, I really got into the laptop problem. The freezing was happening because the hard drive was nearly full. Started clearing cache files, temporary downloads, the usual junk that builds up. That's when I saw the browser history Tony forgot to clear. DraftKings, BetMGM, FanDuel, PokerStars, site after site, logged in sessions stretching back months. The timestamp showed he'd been using Jennifer's computer almost daily while she was at work. I should have closed it right there, minded my own business. But something about the frequency bothered me. This wasn't casual weekend betting on football games. This was obsessive, constant activity. I dug deeper into the cached files and downloaded documents, found account statements that made my hands start shaking. Current balance, minus $175,847. I stared at that number for a full minute, trying to make sense of it. How does someone rack up that kind of debt? The transaction history told the story. Initial deposits of $50, $100, then larger amounts as losses mounted. Cash advances from credit cards. Online loans with interest rates that made my contractor brain scream. Then I found the emails from something called Northside Capital Management. The first few were polite reminders about missed payments. The recent ones were not polite at all. "Mr. Davis, this is your final notice. Balance of $175,847 plus accumulated fees must be paid within 75 days from date of this email. Failure to comply will result in collection activities. We have conducted due diligence on your family situation and assets. Payment arrangements can be discussed." The last email, dated just 3 days ago, was shorter. "Time is running out. We know where Jennifer works. We know Nathan's school schedule. 72 days remaining." I copied everything to a flash drive, my hands shaking so bad I could barely work the mouse. Tony wasn't just in financial trouble. These people were threatening my daughter and grandson. But the worst part was still coming. Hidden in a subfolder labeled Research were documents I never should have seen. Medical records with Dorothy's name on them. Fake letterhead from her doctor's office. Reports about a heart condition that Dorothy never had, never mentioned, never showed symptoms of, except for those last few months when she complained about headaches and fatigue. At the bottom of the folder was a file called Timeline Notes. I opened it, And my world came crashing down. March 2021. Installed modified ventilation in basement workshop. CO redirect successful. Test period 6 months. DM showed symptoms month 3. Complaints of headaches, fatigue consistent with low-level exposure. Adjusted settings month 5. DM deceased month 6. Natural causes ruling successful. Method confirmed effective. DM Dorothy Mitchell. Before she married me and became Dorothy Peterson. I sat there in Jennifer's kitchen, staring at those clinical notes about my wife's murder, and felt something break inside my chest. Tony had killed Dorothy, systematically, deliberately, over 6 months, and he'd written it down like a science experiment. The file contained more details. How he'd modified our old furnace to leak carbon monoxide directly into our master bedroom. How he'd monitored Dorothy's declining health, adjusting gas levels to match a natural progression of heart failure. How he'd even researched which symptoms to watch for, which questions to ask her doctors to steer them away from CO testing. Practice run successful, confident in method for future applications. Inheritance timeline acceptable. Subject's husband showed no suspicion throughout process. Subject's husband. That was me. Dorothy was a subject, and I was just some obstacle who showed no suspicion. My phone buzzed. Text from Tony. How's the computer coming? Should be home around 3 if you need help. I looked at the timestamp. It was already 1:30. I'd been sitting there for over 2 hours, reading and rereading evidence that my son-in-law was a calculating killer who'd murdered my wife and was now in debt to people who threatened my remaining family. I had to get out of there before Tony came home. But first, I needed help from someone who'd believe me. Someone who knew about this kind of thing. I called my brother Eddie. Eddie Peterson is 3 years younger than me, spent 30 years as an electrician before retiring to fish and work on his boat. More importantly, he'd served 4 years in the Navy, knew about systems, about how things could be rigged to look like accidents. If anyone would understand what Id found, it would be Eddie. Carl, what's wrong? You sound like hell. Eddie, I need you to meet me, right now. And I need you to bring your electrical testing equipment. What kind of testing? The kind that detects carbon monoxide. There was a pause. Carl, what's going on? I think Tony killed Dorothy, and I think he's planning to kill me. Another pause, longer this time. Where do you want to meet? My old house, the one they were living in now, but they're not home. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I gathered up all the evidence, copied everything twice, put one set in my truck, and kept the other. If something happened to me, I wanted someone to find proof of what Tony had done. Eddie pulled up just as I was starting to doubt myself. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe the medical documents were forged. Maybe the timeline notes were some kind of sick fantasy. But when I showed Eddie the files on my laptop, his face went white. Jesus Christ, Carl. This isn't fantasy. This is a confession. We went into the house together. Eddie headed straight for the basement with his testing equipment while I kept watch. Upstairs. If Tony came home early, I wanted warning. It didn't take Eddie long to find what we were looking for. Carl, get down here, now. I went down to the basement, where Eddie was kneeling beside the old furnace with a digital meter in his hands. Look at this heat exchanger, he said, pointing to a section of metal piping. See these holes? They're not corrosion, they're not wear patterns. Someone drilled them, deliberately, and look at this duct work. He traced a series of pipes with his finger. This has been rerouted. Instead of venting outside like it's supposed to, it's been redirected back into the house, specifically into the master bedroom upstairs. The meter in his hands was beeping steadily. I'm reading 40 parts per million down here, and that's with the system off. When this furnace runs, carbon monoxide gets pumped directly into the bedroom where you and Dorothy used to sleep. I felt sick. How long would it take? Depends on the concentration, but with this setup, someone sleeping in that room would show symptoms within a few weeks, headaches, fatigue, nausea. After a few months of exposure, especially for someone Dorothy's age, he shook his head. Heart failure would be the likely cause of death, and unless someone specifically tested for CO poisoning, no one would ever know. What do we do? Eddie stood up, his face grim. We call the police. This is evidence of premeditated murder. But before I could answer, we heard a car door slam outside. Tony was home early. Eddie and I looked at each other. We were trapped in the basement, and if Tony found us down here examining the furnace, we'd be in serious trouble. The evidence was damning, but we needed to get out alive to use it. "Hide the equipment," I whispered to Eddie. He shoved the CO detector behind the water heater just as footsteps sounded overhead. "Carl? You still here?" Tony's voice called from the kitchen. I tried to keep my voice normal. "Yeah, just finishing up with the computer." Eddie's, helping me move some boxes for Jennifer. The footsteps moved across the floor above us, then started coming down the basement stairs. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure Tony would hear it. Eddie positioned himself behind the stairwell, out of sight, but ready. Tony appeared at the bottom of the steps, still in his work clothes, tool belt around his waist. For a second, his face was just curious, maybe slightly annoyed that we were in his basement. Then his eyes moved to the furnace, to the scattered tools Eddie hadn't quite hidden, and everything changed. "What are you guys doing down here?" His voice was different now, colder. "Jennifer mentioned the heating bill's been high," I said, trying to sound casual. "Asked me to take a look, see if there is an efficiency problem." Tony's gaze went from me to the furnace, then to Eddie, who'd stepped out from behind the stairs. "And you brought an electrician because I know systems," Eddie said, his voice steady. "And I know when someone's tampered with them." The pretense dropped completely. Tony's whole demeanor shifted, like a mask coming off. The friendly, helpful son-in-law disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You shouldn't have come down here," Tony said quietly. "Why?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "What don't you want us to see?" Tony smiled, and it was the most chilling thing I'd ever witnessed. "How much do you know?" "Enough," Eddie said. "We know about Dorothy." "Do you?" Tony laughed, actually laughed. "Do you know how easy it was? How she never suspected anything? 6 months, Carl. 6 months of slow poisoning, and she never once questioned why I was always so helpful with the furnace maintenance." My hands clenched into fists. "You murdered my wife." "I practiced on your wife," Tony corrected. "There's a difference. Dorothy was a test run to make sure the method worked before I used it on you." The casual way he said it made my blood freeze. "What are you talking about? The gambling debt, Carl? I'm sure you found that on Jennifer's computer. You always were thorough with your repairs. $175,000 to some very unpleasant people who want their money in 72 days. Your estate is worth $2.6 million. Do the math. Jennifer would never. Jennifer doesn't get a choice." Tony cut me off. "What's hers becomes mine. That's how marriage works. And once you're gone, she inherits everything. I've been planning this for 18 months, ever since Dorothy's death proved the method works." Eddie stepped forward. "You're insane if you think you'll get away with this." "I already got away with it once," Tony said. "Heart failure, natural causes. The medical examiner never thought to test for carbon monoxide, because why would he? Loving son-in-law, grieving daughter, no signs of foul play. It'll be even easier the second time. People know we're here," I said. "No, they don't. Eddie's retired, lives alone. You're a widower who spends most days rattling around feeling sorry for himself. Neither of you will be missed for days, maybe weeks." Tony reached into his tool belt and pulled out what looked like a small crowbar. The plan was to wait until spring, let the CO exposure build up gradually. "But you forced my hand. This will have to look like an accident." "Gas leak in the basement, father and son overcome by fumes. The police will investigate." "Will they?" Tony's smile widened. 2 old men in a basement with faulty equipment? Happens all the time, especially when the grieving family is too distraught to ask hard questions. Eddie had been slowly moving closer while Tony talked. Now he made his move, lunging for the crowbar. The 2 men crashed into the furnace, Eddie trying to wrestle the weapon away while Tony fought to keep control. I grabbed for my phone to call 911, but Tony kicked out, catching me in the knee. I went down hard, the phone skittering across the concrete floor. Eddie was stronger than he looked, but Tony was younger, more desperate. They struggled against the furnace, tool belt contents scattering across the floor. Then Tony got the crowbar free and swung it hard. The crack of metal against Eddie's skull was sickening. My brother dropped like a sack, blood pooling under his head. "Eddie!" I crawled toward him, but Tony stepped between us. "He's alive, for now." Tony was breathing hard, blood on his knuckles from where Eddie had fought back. But that won't last long. He looked around the basement, calculating. Change of plans. You two are going to have an accident with the gas water heater. Faulty connection, poor ventilation. By the time Jennifer gets home from work, it'll all be over. Tony went to the water heater and started disconnecting the gas line. The smell of natural gas began filling the air immediately. 20 minutes, he said conversationally. Maybe less if you're unlucky. The gas will knock you unconscious before it kills you. So, that's something. I tried to reach Eddie to check if he was still breathing, but Tony kicked me back. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Carl. Jennifer and Nathan will be well taken care of. The debt gets paid, they get a nice house, life goes on. Jennifer will figure it out, I gasped, the gas making me lightheaded already. Jennifer will be devastated and grateful for my support, just like she was when Dorothy died. Tony headed for the stairs, then paused and looked back at us. For what it's worth, I did like you both. You were good to Jennifer, good to Nathan. But business is business. He climbed the stairs and shut the basement door. I heard the lock click into place. I crawled over to Eddie, feeling for a pulse. Still alive, but unconscious and bleeding. The gas smell was getting stronger, making it hard to think clearly. My phone was somewhere in the dark basement, probably broken. Even if I found it, would I have enough time to call for help before the gas knocked me out? Then I remembered something. My shirt pocket. I always kept a small voice recorder there, habit from my construction days when I needed to make quick notes about measurements or material orders. If I was going to die down here, at least I could leave evidence of what Tony had done. With shaking hands, I pulled out the recorder and hit the record button. I held the recorder close to my mouth, trying to speak clearly, despite the gas making my head swim. This is Carl Peterson, November 15th, 2023, approximately 3:45 p.m. I'm trapped in the basement at 1247 Maple Street with my brother Eddie Peterson. Tony Davis has disconnected the gas line to kill us. The gas smell was getting stronger. I could feel myself getting drowsy, but I forced myself to keep talking. Tony confessed to murdering my wife, Dorothy, in March 2022 using carbon monoxide poisoning. He modified the furnace to pump CO into our bedroom over 6 months. Called it practice for killing me. He owes $175,000 to loan sharks. Needs my $2.6 million estate. Eddie stirred beside me, groaning softly. Still alive? But the head injury looked bad. Tony has gambling debts to Northside Capital Management. They threaten Jennifer and Nathan. He plans to make my death look accidental to inherit through Jennifer. The furnace has been sabotaged. Eddie found deliberate holes drilled in the heat exchanger. My voice was getting weaker, the gas making it hard to concentrate. But I had to get this all down, everything I'd found. Evidence is on flash drives in my truck. Computer files show Tony's betting history, emails from loan sharks, fake medical records for Dorothy, timeline notes describing her murder step by step. I paused, fighting to stay conscious. The basement was spinning slightly. If we die down here, don't let Tony get away with this. He killed Dorothy. He's trying to kill us. Jennifer doesn't know. She's innocent. Protect Nathan. The recorder slipped from my hand as another wave of dizziness hit. I fumbled around in the dark, found it again. Eddie's hurt bad. Head injury from crowbar. We're at 1247. Maple Street, basement. Tony locked us in, disconnected gas water heater. If anyone finds this, I couldn't finish the sentence. The gas was winning, but then I heard something that made me fight to stay alert. Car doors slamming outside, multiple cars, voices in the driveway. Jennifer's voice, but also others I didn't recognize. Jennifer's home early, I whispered into the recorder. Other people with her. Maybe... The basement door rattled. Someone was trying the handle. Dad, are you down there? Jennifer's voice, worried. I tried to yell, but only managed a weak croak. The gas had stolen my voice. Heavy footsteps on the stairs, different from Tony's. A flashlight beam swept across the basement. Jesus Christ! Gas leak! A man's voice I didn't recognize. Get back upstairs now. My father and uncle are down here. Jennifer's voice panicked. Mom, you need to evacuate immediately. We're calling the fire department. I heard rapid footsteps, people shouting orders. The flashlight found me. First, then Eddie. 2 victims, both conscious but affected by gas exposure. Need paramedics now. Someone in a uniform, fire department, I realized, came down with breathing gear. He shut off the gas line first, then checked Eddie's pulse. This one's got a head injury. Looks like blunt force trauma. Another firefighter appeared. They got oxygen masks on both of us, started carrying us upstairs. The fresh air hit like a slap, clearing my head enough to see what was happening. Jennifer was standing in the driveway crying, surrounded by police officers and firefighters. Tony was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Tony?" I managed to ask the paramedic working on me. "Sir, you need to save your strength. We're taking you to the hospital." But Jennifer heard me. She came over as they loaded me into the ambulance. "Dad, I don't understand what happened. I came home with the police. They said someone called in a tip about Tony. Something about gambling debts and threats. The police. Someone had called them." "The computer," I whispered. "Check the computer. Evidence." "Sir, we need to go," the paramedic said. But he let Jennifer ride with us to the hospital. On the way, a detective introduced himself. "Detective Ray Morrison, Organized Crime Unit." "Mr. Peterson, we received an anonymous tip about threats made against your family by loan sharks. When we went to question Tony Davis at his job site, coworkers said he'd left suddenly around noon, seemed agitated. He tried to kill us," I said, the oxygen mask making my voice muffled. "We're investigating. The gas leak appears deliberate. And we found some interesting things in his truck. At the hospital, they kept Eddie overnight for observation. Concussion and 12 stitches, but he'd recover. They released me after a few hours with instructions to rest and avoid stress. Fat chance of that. Detective Morrison was waiting when I got discharged. "Mr. Peterson, we need to talk. We found your flash drives in your truck, and we've been going through the computer files. What you discovered? This is much bigger than we initially thought." He showed me a tablet with arrest warrants displayed. Tony Davis wanted for questioning in connection with murder, attempted murder, and extortion. Problem is, he's gone. Cleaned out his bank accounts this afternoon, truck found abandoned at the bus station. He ran. But Mr. Peterson, those loan sharks Tony owed money to, they're not just local criminals. Northside Capital Management is a front for organized crime. Federal investigation, multiple states involved. Your evidence might be the break we've been waiting for. I thought about the voice recording still in my shirt pocket. "Detective, there's something else you need to hear." Back at the station, they played my recording for a room full of FBI agents. Tony's full confession, his description of Dorothy's murder, his plans for me and Eddie. "This is gold," said Agent Sarah Knox, the FBI task force leader. "Combined with the physical evidence from the furnace and the computer files, we have enough to charge Tony Davis with murder 1. Now we just have to find him." "What about the loan sharks?" "That's where this gets interesting," Agent Knox said. "Those threats against Jennifer and Nathan, they gave us probable cause to tap Northside Capital's phones. We've been listening to their operation for the last 6 hours. She pulled up an audio file on her computer. This is from 4:30 today, about 45 minutes after you were rescued. A voice I didn't recognize. "The Davis situation is blown. Police have evidence, federal involvement now, cut all ties." Another voice. "What about collection? Write it off. Davis is liability now. If he surfaces, he's not our problem anymore." Agent Knox looked at me seriously. "Mr. Peterson, as of tonight, Tony Davis is a man with nowhere to run. The people he owed money to have disowned him. Law enforcement in 3 states is looking for him. And when we catch him, your recording is going to put him away for life. When, not if. When," she said firmly. "Men like Tony Davis always make mistakes when they're desperate. And right now, he's as desperate as they come." Agent Knox was right about desperate men making mistakes. Tony lasted exactly 72 hours on the run before his gambling addiction caught up with him. The call came Thursday morning while I was having coffee with Eddie, who was staying at my apartment while he recovered from the concussion. Detective Morrison's voice was excited when I answered. "We got him. Tony Davis was arrested at a casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Tried to use a fake ID to get into a high-stakes poker game." "How'd you find him?" "The casino has facial recognition software tied into federal databases. The moment he walked in, alarms went off. Local police had him in custody within 20 minutes. Eddie, listening on speaker, shook his head. Couldn't even stay away from the tables long enough to properly disappear. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a courtroom watching Tony Davis get arraigned for first-degree murder. He'd aged 10 years in those 2 weeks on the run, Orange jumpsuit, shackles, hollow eyes that wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. Jennifer sat beside me, still trying to process everything. The divorce papers had been filed the day after his arrest. She had moved out of the Maple Street house, taken Nathan to stay with her mother while she figured out what came next. "How did I not see it?" she whispered as Tony's lawyer entered a not guilty plea. "Because he didn't want you to see it," I said. "That's what predators do. They hide until they're ready to strike." The trial took 4 months. Tony's defense attorney tried to argue temporary insanity, claimed the gambling addiction had driven him to desperation. But my voice recording killed that strategy. You can't claim insanity when you spent 6 months systematically planning and executing a murder, then documenting the process for future reference. The prosecution played the recording in court, Tony's own words describing Dorothy as practice and detailing how he'd modified the furnace. Several jurors wiped their eyes when they heard him laughing about how trusting Dorothy had been. Eddie testified about the sabotage furnace. The medical examiner who'd originally ruled Dorothy's death, Natural Causes admitted he'd never tested for carbon monoxide because there was no reason to suspect foul play. Jennifer took the stand and described how Tony had encouraged her to have Dorothy's body cremated quickly, claiming it's what Dorothy would have wanted, how he'd been so helpful during my grieving process, always volunteering to check on me, to maintain my apartment's heating system. He was positioning himself, the prosecutor explained to the jury, learning Carl Peterson's routines, gaining access to his home, preparing for the second murder. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder of Dorothy Peterson, attempted murder of Carl and Eddie Peterson, extortion, fraud. The judge sentenced Tony to life without parole plus 50 years. As they led him away in shackles, Tony finally looked at our family. No remorse, no apology. Just cold calculation, like he was still figuring angles. That was 8 months ago. Jennifer and Nathan moved into a small house across town, close to Nathan's school. She's dating again. A teacher named Richard who seems decent enough. Time will tell, but him watching, always watching now. Eddie recovered completely, though he jokes that he's got a thick skull anyway. We have coffee every Tuesday and Thursday, talk about everything except that day in the basement. Some memories are better left alone. Nathan's 8 now, asking questions about why his stepfather went away. Jennifer and I decided on honesty, age-appropriate but honest. Some people make very bad choices, I tell him. When they do, there are consequences. But how do you know who to trust, Grandpa? It's the question that keeps me up some nights. You trust. Carefully, Nathan. You watch what people do, not just what they say. And you remember that protecting your family is the most important job you'll ever have. Nathan nods like he understands. Maybe he does. The $2.6 million that Tony was so desperate to steal, most of it's going into a trust for Nathan's education. Some went to a foundation Dorothy and I always talked about starting for victims of domestic violence. Money doesn't bring people back, but it can do good in the right hands. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry. The honest answer is no. Anger was eating me up for months after the truth came out. What helped was knowing Dorothy got justice, that Eddie and I survived, and that Nathan will grow up understanding the difference between right and wrong. I learned something important through all this. Evil doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it sits at your dinner table, calls you dad, and helps fix your air conditioning. Trust isn't something you give blindly, even to family. Real trust is earned through actions, consistency, time. Nathan helps me fix things around my apartment now. Good with tools, pays attention to details. I'm teaching him to build, but more importantly, I am teaching him to think, to question, to protect himself and the people he loves. That's Dorothy's real legacy, making sure the next generation is stronger and smarter than we were. Sometimes that's the best justice of all. The greatest threat to your family often comes wearing the face of someone you trust. The real danger isn't the stranger at your door, it's the predator already sitting at your table. A man's legacy isn't measured by the wealth he leaves behind, but by the wisdom he passes down, teaching the next generation to recognize wolves in sheep's clothing before it's too late.